Good afternoon, and welcome to the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art. My name is Jody Seasonwine, and I'm the Senior Curator for Western Art here. Before I introduce today's speaker, Dr. Akiko Walley, I want to just mention a couple of events that are coming up here at the museum. On Friday, November 21st at 12 p.m., we have a free noontime concert of chamber music featuring students from the University of Oregon School of Music and Dance. The weekend of Thanksgiving is our annual Be Our Guest weekend. We are offering free admission to the public over the long weekend in honor of the holiday. And on Wednesday, December 3rd at 5:30, we have a lecture entitled Encountering the Animal, being given by Allison Hawthorne Deming, who's a professor of creative writing at the University of Arizona. And this is the last event that's being held in conjunction with our exhibition that's on view right now, Ryo Toyonaga Awakening. Allison Hawthorne Deming is going to be speaking about animals from the earliest cave art to the work of Ryo Toyonaga, and will be responding to the exhibition and reading from her new book, Zoologies on Animals and the Human Spirit. So those are some of the things that are coming up. But now on to today's speaker. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Akiko Walley. Dr. Walley is the Maud I. Kearns Assistant Professor of Japanese Art in the Department of the History of Art and Architecture here at the University of Oregon. A specialist in East Asian Buddhist art, she earned her PhD from the Department of the History of Art and Architecture at Harvard University in 2009. Dr. Walley currently has 2 book projects in progress. The first, due to be published in 2015, explores the rise of a new visual language of diplomacy in 6th and 7th century Japan through the use of Buddhist objects. And the second is on the representation of the magical nature of relics of the Buddha in 7th to 8th century East Asian reliquaries. Dr. Walley is also collaborating with Anne-Rose Kitagawa, Chief Curator of Collections in Asian Art at the JSMA, on a special exhibition of the 150-plus contemporary Japanese prints recently donated to the museum by Jack and Susie Wadsworth. This generous gift, including the Kusama Yayoi prints featured today, will be on view in the fall of 2015. The title of Dr. Walley's talk today is Floating in Her Lemon Juice, the Concept of Love in Kusama Yayoi's Prints. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Akiko Walley.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Yeah? Oh, good. I can barely hear myself, so that's actually amazing. Thank you, Jody, for a kind introduction. And I would also like to thank the JSMA for giving me this opportunity to talk today. As you may have guessed from Jody's introduction, thank you. Jody's introduction, my area of specialization is early East Asian Buddhist art, early meaning 7th and 8th century or so. So this talk is actually slightly outside of my field, but it's a new topic that I have been thinking recently. So I am very grateful that I have a chance to present my preliminary thoughts and ask for perhaps your comments and feedbacks. So as Jody mentioned, today's talk features prints by contemporary artist named Kusama Yayoi, currently on view upstairs in the Purple Murphy Gallery. Through a generous donation by Jack and Susie Wadsworth, JSMA now holds 5 of Kusama Yayoi's most representative prints, including some of the her signature motifs like the pumpkins that you see here, or high-heel shoes, or some of the reoccurring subject matters within prints, such as the lemon juice or lemon squash, and flower basket, and also fruit basket. So, and beyond that, it's actually very special that we have one lithograph that Kusama Yayoi really only made during brief periods of time in 1982, 84, and 92. So this is a very, very special collection. And this year, I'm teaching 2 courses that on Japanese prints that feature 20th and 21st century, and we are spending a whole lot of time in the museum looking at works from the Wordsworth collection. So I'm very grateful because the class, as well as in many respects this talk today, would not have happened if it weren't for the Wordsworth's support in our education mission of the museum and the university, but also their support for the, and conviction for the value of object-centric teaching. So with that, okay, let's begin with a print. Seen from afar, the subject matter of this print, entitled Lemon Juice, seems to be blatantly obvious, perhaps even too obvious to be intriguing. We can clearly discern a tall glass with liquid. A straw lightly rests on the inside of the rim to the right, while the slice of lemon hugs the other side of the rim. The glass appears to be 2/3 full with green and yellow, quote-unquote, lemon juice. The liquid seems fizzy, indicating that perhaps it is carbonated, a speculation in accord with the artist's intent, for some versions of the same print are titled lemon squash, a British term for a carbonated fruit drink that has been imported into Japan and into Japanese. 3 triangles, presumably pieces of juice sac, appear to fall into the lemon juice, while 2 seeds sink to the bottom of the glass. The bright yellow of the lemon juice matches the yellow of the bottom third of the glass, seems to convey the refreshing bittersweet taste of the fizzy lemon juice. When we approach the print closer, however, the image starts to get agitated, unstable, and bubbly. The contour of the glass is delineated not by outlines, but by rows of dots, held intact by 2 kinds of net-like patterns that surround them. A violet leaf-like net, or rather blackish leaf-like shapes on a violet background, and a black geometric net on a pinkish background. The bubble-like polka dots of varying size and color appear not only on the glass, but on the seeds, the 3 pieces of juice sac, the skin, the exo and mesocarp of the lemon slice, and parts of the straw. The geometric net pattern that we see surrounding the bottom third of the glass also appears inside the endocarp of the lemon slice. I needed to, look up all these terms. I didn't know anything about lemon. Inside the straw, the surface of the lemon juice, the bottom of the glass, and the empty part of the glass above the surface of the juice are all filled with brick-like pattern. The details of this print are flat, patterned, and defy the principle of naturalism, yet mesmerizingly intriguing that one begins to sense, perhaps in mild frustration, that mundaneness of a brain that autocorrects to register what is on this print only as refreshing fizzy lemon juice in a glass, rather than what it actually is, an accumulation of repeated patterns. This piece is one of about 400 works in printed media by the internationally acclaimed artist Kusama Yayoi. Born in 1929 in the old castle town of Matsumoto in Nagano Prefecture, Kusama eventually debuted in New York in 1959 with her sensational Infinity Net, a painting of a laborious hand-drawn small repeated net pattern on a black or grayish background. Since then, Kusama has continued to produce thoughtful, provocative, and at times quite high-profile works in painting, sculpture, collage, installation using mirrors and lights, a series of happenings, fashion, novels, poetry, and of course prints. Unlike her works in other media, the complex and thought-provoking nature of her prints, as well as Kusama's profound grasp of the artistic potential of this medium, so far have rarely been acknowledged in the present discourse on her 7.5 decade worth of artistic production. Although there have been exhibitions dedicated to her prints, These works seem to typically be excluded from major retrospectives of her career and largely skipped over in scholarly discourse of her oeuvre. Kusama's prints could appear straightforward at first glance, or for those who are familiar with her career, even derivative of her works in other media. For instance, in this case, this is the oldest print, the earliest print that she made of a shoe. And the general idea of using net-like pattern to create a form of a shoe already appears in 1975 in this piece called Shoe Fairy. It's a collage. Kusama herself explicitly ties her prints to her other, more acclaimed works, as she states in the bilingual foreword to the catalog resume of her prints. I have been turning pages of my life using every possible means, such as sculpture, installation, electric environment, light source illusion, repetitive vision, sex food obsession, infinity nets, compulsion furniture. I would like to emphasize here that prints are part of each of these aspects. In many instances, the motifs one finds in her prints closely reflect transformation in Kusama's work in other media. On the other hand, as Tatehata Akira points out, prints are a medium print as a medium is in a certain sense the most natural for the principles of repetition, multiplication, and accumulation that are at the core of all of Kusama's artistic production. In fact, in this presentation, I will demonstrate, or I will argue, that Kusama's prints are a key to understanding her artistic production since 1977, when she voluntarily checks herself into the mental hospital where she has resided for the past 37 years. Kusama returned to Japan in 1973 after a 17-year stay in the United States. Beginning in 1975, 2 years after her return to her home country, Kusama seemingly very suddenly became vocal about her past, her illness, and their effects on her activities as an artist. I will argue that as she creates or recreates the narrative of her own visual works through her literary works, including novels, autobiography, essays, and poems, placing them in the context of her childhood abuse and hallucinations, the underlying message of her visual works seems to subtly shift from the manifestation of her phobia and sense of isolation to a more aggressive pursuit of pure form of communication, what she calls love. First, a brief introduction to Kusama's prints. Kusama Yayoi began producing prints in 1979, 5 years after her return to Japan. Although Kusama was highly acclaimed in the New York scene as a cutting-edge avant-garde artist and a provocateur, at the time of her return, her works had hardly been exhibited in Japan, and Kusama was virtually unknown in her home country. Although, according to the owner of the gallery, Tokino Wasuremono, who distributed many of Kusama's prints, Kusama's unfalteringly confident about the artistic merit of her prints, they did not receive the attention they deserved until a major retrospective of her 60s and 70s works at the prestigious Fuji Television Gallery in 1982. The earliest exhibition on record of Kusama's prints was a dual show shown at the Hosun Gallery in 1983 with another avant-garde artist, Shinohara Ushio, who also started working in the print medium in the latter half of the 60s. The first catalog resume of Kusama's prints was published in 1992 by Abe Publishing, who subsequently published revised editions in 2005, 2011, and most recently in 2013. And this is the front cover of it. The first exhibition of Kusama's prints in a museum was in 1993 at the Fukuoka Art Museum, immediately following the publication of the catalog resume and Kusama's participation in the Venice Biennale the same year. Kusama works in screen printing, lithography, intaglio, and relief printing. As far as we can tell from the catalog resume, Kusama does not use more than one print technique in any given piece. Her most preferred method is screen printing. Like many artists of her generation and younger who do not necessarily identify themselves first and foremost as print artists, but nevertheless work in this medium, Kusama does not print her own works. She instead collaborates with professional printers such as Okabe Tokuzo, Kimura Kihachi, and Ishida Ryoichi. According to the 2013 catalog Resone, Kusama has produced close to 400 prints in the past 35 years. The edition for each print ranging from less than 10 to 150, with an average falling somewhere between 50 and 100. So, what drives Kusama as an artist, and how does the idea of love factor into the artistic production, her artistic production? Although Kusama does not start framing her works in terms of her condition or her childhood trauma until mid-1970s, the idea of connection and communication through art has apparently been important to her from early on in her artistic career. For instance, in the essay Kusama published circa 1957, entitled "On the Eve of My Departure for the United States, My Dream is Thus About to Come True," she wrote that as she lived through the war, she decided to become an artist and travel overseas so that she could, quote, "communicate with a wider audience, especially people abroad, through my art," end quote. This sentiment of connecting or reconnecting with the world through art is something shared by many artists, Japanese artists, in the immediate post-war period. In the works Kusama produced during her early years in the hometown of Matsumoto, and through her time in New York, however, her yearning to connect through art manifested itself predominantly as expression of her isolation, fear of losing her identity, and the rejection of physical connection as violation or even death itself. In New York, Kusama often expressed her feeling of isolation by underscoring her gender and ethnicity by appearing in public or in her work in her kimono, or by being documented as the only one who is fully clothed in many of the orgies she orchestrated in the 1960s for world peace and in protest of Vietnam War. So what's going on in here? This one is called the walking piece, and it almost appears like a video, but these are actually colored slides documenting her performance. What she did was she is in Japanese kimono, very pinkish, and if you know anything about kimono, you might realize that this is actually a children's kimono. The obi is sort of a squishy, soft one, and you know this bright pink color also suggests that it's meant to be kind of a children's kimono. And she is walking around different neighborhoods in New York and some industrial areas, and alone with this umbrella with lots of flowers on it. And at the end, there is a sequence of her losing the umbrella and crying and going back towards the city in remorse. So this, in a way, it's quite obvious what's going on, that she is highlighting her isolation as a foreigner, but also as a woman. But she is also, adding one more layer because she is infantilizing herself. And this piece is many of the quote-unquote orgies that Kusama orchestrated. And this is the one that was done on Brooklyn Bridge in New York. In many of these pieces, there were professional photographers photographing them, but predominantly, Kusama appears fully clothed and everybody else is naked. And she talks about it, that there was a practical side, that if she got arrested doing this, then it's going to affect her business. So, that's one of the reasons why she is in her clothing. But, we need to take that with a little bit of grain of salt, because there is a photograph of her completely naked, surrounded by people who is fully clothed. So her choice to be fully clothed in these scenes, indicates something a little bit more than just practicality, that she is orchestrating this love fest for others, but she herself is actually not quite part of it. After her New York debut in 1959, the infinitely expanding net and dot patterns consumed her pieces, whether it be painting, sculpture, environmental installations, or happenings. Beginning in 1962, Kusama adds to her repertoire the food sex obsession, the installations of found objects covered with soft sculpture of phalluses or countless dried macaroni. These works are connected to each other through what Kusama considers to be the underlying concepts behind all of her artistic production. The idea of infinite multiplication or self-multiplication, obliteration or self-obliteration, and accumulation. In her later years, Kusama explains these underlying concepts through her childhood experiences. In her autobiography, Kusama recalls a childhood panic attack following a hallucination of floral patterns on a living room tablecloth, spreading to the ceiling, windows, posts, an entire room, and onto her body, consuming her. Although Kusama was not yet framing her net paintings in terms of her childhood traumas during the New York years, it still seems plausible that the idea of a perpetuating geometric pattern was at least a fascination of hers from an early age, as evidenced by the drawing of what one presumes to be the cracking pattern on a tall vase, expanding beyond the contour of the vase itself. So this is a pencil drawing, so it might be a little bit hard to see. But in addition to these big flowers that are, you can't quite tell if these are actually wall paper or her hallucination. And you see these dots, but you also see this pattern that's on the vase that's spreading outside of it onto the wall. The idea of expanding field of pattern we can observe in her youthful sketch, as well as, for instance, in the warping checkered tablecloth pattern in her 1949 Japanese-style painting of 3 onions, seem to provide us with a distant precursor to the net patterns that infuse many of her later works, particularly prints. According to Kusama, the multiplication of infinitely repeated patterns threatens to consume and obliterate her along with everything else in the universe. To overcome the fear of obliteration, Kusama instead accumulates the infinite patterns and contains them in her artworks. But her method of addressing her fear is somewhat of a vicious cycle. As she describes in her anecdote about producing the 1959 Infinity Net, the repeated patterns, Kusama accumulated constantly got out of hand, beginning to self-multiply, threatening to obliterate Kusama's existence. In autobiography, Infinity Net, Kusama recounts the multiple panic attacks she had in the process of creating the first Infinity Net. She states, "When I woke up in the morning, the net I painted the day before was all stuck to the apartment window. That's odd, I thought," she says, and got close to it, but then the net started to transfer to my hand. My heartbeat started to race. Although in an interview published in Hanga Geijutsu in 1999, Kusama admits that she was initially not very interested in producing prints until she was turned on to it by a professional printer, Okabe Tokuzo, there is no question that print as medium is a natural fit for Kusama's artistic concerns. In fact, reproduction using offset printing was critical in her 1964 piece, Aggregation 1000 Boat Show. In this piece, Kusama placed her boat accumulation, or a boat with oars covered with white phallic forms, at the center of a room surrounded by 999 monochrome prints of a photograph of the boat aggregation shot from above. The mechanically reproduced images of the boat aggregation take over the space as if to replicate the fearful experience she had while painting the 1959 Infinity Net. That is, one's creation itself escapes one's control by self-perpetuating and eventually consumes its maker. Through recreating the situation, though, it seems Kusama has triumphed over her fear, breaking free of the vicious cycle of accumulation, self-multiplication, and obliteration. As a finishing touch, Kusama inserts herself into the installation, either standing or seated nude on or by the boat aggregation, seemingly relaxed. Her petite figure and thin shoulders in these photographs, however, seem enough to evoke a sense of uneasiness in viewers that her triumph over her fears is merely temporary. The fear of infinite multiplication and self-obliteration is most certainly present in the works she created after her return to Japan in 1973, including her printed works. The same motifs and patterns appear in Kusama's prints. What I believe to be more interesting, however, is the way in which prints seem to play an essential role as an expression of the flip side of the Kusama coin. Her autobiography and autobiographical novels make clear that to Kusama, the idea of self-obliteration clearly has a positive or more affirmative side. For instance, in her 1998 novel, Violet Obliteration, or Sumire Kyohaku, the protagonist Sachiko, who based on Kusama's autobiography is a thinly fictionalized version of her childhood, proclaims, my entire body is made of 100 billion bubbles. I resonate with 100 billion stars that shine in the heavens, converse with clouds made of 100 billion microscopic dewdrops, hear the voice of winds that carry the 100 billion particles, and can play with violets born out of 100 billion petals, stamens, and grains of pollens. For Kusama, to have oneself obliterated is simultaneously a fearful loss of one's identity and a way to connect with others, nature, and ultimately the universe itself. As I mentioned at the outset, as she embarked on her trip to the United States, Kusama already had the desire and ambition to communicate with others through art. Intriguingly, just as she began emphasizing the personal nature of her imagination in 1975 by more explicitly framing her artistic production in terms of her childhood and illness, Kusama became much more vocal about her desire to connect to others through art. It is clear from her food sex obsession pieces that the connection she thought she sought was something pure and most definitely platonic, but intimate, even spiritual. Something, for instance, that she already presents in the film called Kusama's Self-Obliteration that was done in 1967. So this is just a photograph from the shoot where she is riding a horse bareback, and she's wearing a white dress, and part of her polka dots are red, but the horse has white polka dots. And if you see, this is black and white, so you can't quite see the color, but if you see her boots, the boots has this white dots. So part of her, and the hair too, so part of her body is actually fusing with the body of the horse, and that's indicative of her desire to connect with the universe itself. Okay. In an interview with Tatehata Akira, included in the edited volume entitled Yayoi Kusama, published in 2000 by Phaidon Press, Kusama recaps one instance of her panic attacks. On Kawara was across the hall upstairs. One day, I was struck by fear while I was standing in the building. I cried out, I am scared. Somebody please come. There came Mr. Kawara. Don't worry, no need to be scared. I am with you. He lay down with me. There was no sex, but we held each other naked. He helped calm down my attack. When she was asked by Takehata what the problem was, she described it as, quote, depersonalization, where everything she looked at became utterly remote. What calmed her down in this particular instance was the intimate but safe connection to another human being provided by a fellow artist, Onkawara. The stark contrast in Kusama's interaction with others through her art can be seen in the happenings she performed at the 1966 and 1993 Venice Biennale. This is the one from 1966. In 1966, Kusama was not officially invited to exhibit in the Venice Biennale, but she gained permission to have an installation in the garden outside the Italian pavilion. She created the Narcissus Garden, placing some 1,500 plastic mirror balls, then announcing that she would sell each of the mirror balls for $2. The installation itself was an elegant presentation of her recurring themes: self-obliteration, self-multiplication, and accumulation. Although in the end, Kusama had to give up her initial plan to sell the mirror balls, the attempt was nevertheless a poignant critique of the commodification of artworks done in good humor. More significant to our purpose, when the performance, what this performance would have been had it been carried out, was a symbolic distribution not of Kusama's self, but of the device that allowed one to obliterate and multiply oneself. In contrast to 1966, Kusama participated in the 1993 Venice Biennale as the official and the only represented artist for the Japanese pavilion. The exhibition did feature some of her most representative works from the New York days, but the centerpiece was an environmental installation entitled Mirror Room Pumpkin that she produced in 1991. In this installation, a mirror cube was placed at the center of a yellow room with black polka dots. The inside of the cube was also covered in mirrors. When one peeped into the cube, she or he would have seen reflections of pumpkin-like objects of different size, again covered in black polka dots, infinitely expanding in all directions. Again, as a finishing touch, Kusama has herself photographed next to the mirror cube, wearing a long robe and a pointed hat of the same shade of yellow as the room itself, also with black polka dots. This photographic documentation of Kusama's self-obliteration was included at the very end of the exhibition catalog. Significantly, on the opening day, Kusama stood at the entrance to her exhibition in the same yellow robe and hat she used for the photo shoot, personally handing a small sculpture of her signature pumpkin to each visitor. Kusama calls a pumpkin her companion for life. She time and again expresses her special fixation on an affinity for this vegetable. A polka dot pumpkin appears in her works in all media, so for her to personally gift a miniature pumpkin at this 1993 Biennale was to, in effect, equivalent to her gifting a piece of Kusama herself. Unlike the happenings she planned for the 1966 Biennale, which only worked to make others aware of their isolation, her performance at the 1993 Biennale was about connection. The visitors not only met the artist in person, but also brought home a piece of her with them. Even in her New York days, Kusama used the word love in titles of her works, as exemplified by her famous 1966 mirror and light installation, Endless Love Show, which she also titled Endless Peep Show. So what this is this is a 6 hexagonal box, sort of similar to the one we saw for the 1993 Biennale one, where there are few holes that are open so that people can peep in but not enter. And the inside is this beautiful light installation of kind of a psychedelic kind, and once you see kind of the video, it moves very, very fast and the light changes constantly. At the exhibition, Kusama distributed small round cards that clearly meant to remind one of her polka dot patterns with "Love Forever" printed on them. So the concept of love was clearly at the heart of this installation. On the other hand, Kusama clearly stated in the promotional pamphlet for the exhibition that the Endless Love Show enveloped the concepts such as mechanization, repetition, obsession, compulsion, dizziness, and the eternal love that never comes true. Just as the viewer was invited to peep into the Endless Love Show and see the reflection of oneself and fellow viewers, but not enter, love expressed in this piece was an ideal that existed but can never be obtained. As opposed to her works in New York that seemed to generally emit a sense of resignation, the love, at least for Kusama, was something unobtainable. Kusama's works after her return to Japan exhibit not just her effort to spread her love for others and humanity in general, but also her effort to more actively reach out for the love of others for her and her works. In her poem, The Mystery, that accompanied the catalog to her most recent traveling exhibition, Eternity of Eternal Eternity, which just ended in September of this year, Kusama proclaims, "Lest my love burns out, I want to embrace the love of all the people, love forever." The slight shift in nuance of love seems to hint at Kusama's more optimistic outlook that she can be loved too. The same desire to connect is expressed in Kusama's bilingual forewords to the catalog raisonné of her prints. Whenever I work on prints, I am filled with a wish to convey to the people my thought in a deep, straight, and pure way with clear brightness. This is why I can keep creating prints. I wish to make countless duplicates of the same visual field and spread them across the world. Considering how Kusama describes her condition as depersonalization, it is significant that she became interested in print as a medium after she checked into the hospital. Physically more detached from society and her works virtually unknown in Japan, Kusama became actually isolated for the first time in a very long time once she moved into the hospital. It seems that she embraced her fear of isolation by flipping the coin and amplifying her message of love and pure connection, while reframing her works as her avatar by more intimately and explicitly connecting them to her childhood memories and her still continuing hallucinations. Kusama reworks her signature net and polka dot motifs in her prints, sometimes in recognizable and approachable figural forms, and other times in more abstract patterns. This reframing of her artistic production in some instances is characterized as her quote-unquote branding or marketing of her own image, simply perpetuating her established motifs as her logos and feeding off her cutting-edge glory days of the 60s. It is true that Kusama is very open about her interest in keeping tabs on the reception of her works. For instance, in 2008 documentary shows Kusama checking every appearance of her pieces in publications. And in terms of her prints, she once commented, "The reason I continue to produce prints of pumpkin motifs is because I hear the continuous cry of enthusiasm of the people in Japan saying, 'Wow, how lovely.'" On another occasion, she also admits that initially what she wanted to do with prints was to transform her net, quote unquote, transform her net patterns into mundane daily motifs to create something kitsch and catchy. On the other hand, the very process of printing seems to fit conceptually with her other works. For instance, in screen printing, the way in which Kusama's original image must first be disassembled into planes of colors and reassembled back into the recognizable image echoes her idea of obliteration and accumulation. Her intaglio pieces, according to the catalog raisonné, are exclusively done in etching, while the relief prints are exclusively embossing. Although she has produced lithographs, it appears to be the technique she prefers the least. What this means is that Kusama seems to deliberately choose, or at least gravitate towards, the printing methods that remove the traces of her hand, while screen printing as a technique necessitates the dismantling of her image into colors. In etching, the actual incision are made by acid biting into the plates. In embossing, on the other hand, her outlines is traced into relief and printed as white positive space by professional printers. As I mentioned earlier, Kusama does not print her works herself. What this means is that in her prints, Kusama's presence is effectively dissolved, obliterated into her works in the very process of their making. Dissolving or self-obliterating within the production process, Kusama sends her message of love in a medium easily reproduced and circulated without her physical presence. In her 1999 interview, Kusama gives an intriguing anecdote. One time, a friend of Kusama's called her to report that she or he saw Kusama's prints and paintings on display at the shopfront window of many art galleries in Ginza. Before she knew it, Kusama continues, titles of her works started to appear on advertisements for galleries in art magazines. She concludes, "My prints really get around." Not only is it that Kusama here seems to be thoroughly pleased with the recognition and prestige her prints are receiving, what also seems to be implied in this story is her pleasure in seeing her prints being circulated outside of her knowledge, then learning about it after the fact. Just as Kusama is dissolved in her works, she is now dissolved in those who circulate her works. In this respect, one version of her lemon squash that was included as a bonus offset print in the 1993 February edition of 21st Century Prints is arguably the most in line with her ideal, even though it is not included in the catalog raisonné. Intriguingly, Kusama seems to pursue this idea of complete self-obliteration into her work in a series of prints with reoccurring motifs by removing the trace of her hand. For instance, when we compare the 5 versions of lemon juice or lemon squash included in the catalog raisonné, we realize that although they share the same general composition, Kusama seems to make her glass of lemon juice increasingly dramatic and impersonal. Unlike the version that is in the Wadsworth collection, which retains the free hand-like undulation in the form of the lemon slice, the glass, and the straw, giving a certain sense of organic warmth, the contour of the central motif in the later versions seems regular and almost rigid. The regularity of size and placement of the polka dots, too, adds to the feeling of machine-like artificiality. A similar observation can be made about her lithographs, where she seems to eliminate the pencil-like soft outline that delineates the high heels in the 1982 series and replace them with the thin, controlled black outlines in the 1992 lemon squash. The glitter she started to incorporate into the background of some of her screen prints beginning in 1986 is an effective method of creating a dot-like pattern that, as far as I can tell, does not appear very much in her works in other media. At the same time, the metallic shimmer of the glitter seems to further accentuate the overall inorganic feel of the piece. In these printed works, Kusama seems to reduce her physical presence by disappearing into the production process. Her later versions of the lemon squash prints continue to be intimately tied to her, but simultaneously depersonalized from her. She creates a space for them to, quote-unquote, self-accumulate and self-multiply by taking advantage of the fact that printing and circulation of these pieces take place away from Kusama's hand. Now, I must hastily add that not all of her prints exhibit the same kind of progression. Kusama is still very prolific, and her expression much too diverse for any generalization of her intent to be fully applicable. Yet, the idea of a more aggressive pursuit of communication and connection with others through art, while taking steps to increasingly dissolve her presence in her works, seems to fit with the way Kusama presents herself in mass media in recent years. As we can see from the photograph to the right of Kusama's interview for the exhibition Eternity of Eternal Eternity, or another one taken at the opening party at Louis Vuitton, New York, of the new lineup of merchandise featuring Kusama's design, Kusama frequently appears in public in clothes she designed, often printed with her signature motifs. Kusama, in other words, is her work, so much so that the more we chase after the real Kusama, or the Kusama that is somehow distinct from her work, the deeper we find ourselves in the work of Kusama's art, world of Kusama's art. In recent years, Kusama seems to have taken even further steps to incorporate her prints to her overall artistic production. In 2004, Kusama began producing a series of monochrome painting using black marker on white canvas. The 50-work series entitled Love Forever was completed in 2007, and it was one of the centerpieces of the Eternity of Eternal Eternity exhibition. The freehand drawing we see in the series itself has a precedent in her exhibition at the Mori Art Museum in 2004. Each canvas measuring an impressive 130 times 162 centimeters, the series as a whole appears as a monumental, organic, free-flowing stream of Kusama's consciousness, with familiar geometric patterns and figural motifs combined with accumulation of body parts such as eyes, faces, and mouths. An intriguing aspect of this piece that does not seem to get touched upon very much is that Kusama made 5 screen print editions of this series, and this screen print version, not her original painting, was what was shown in the Eternity of Eternity and other exhibitions. What this means is that for categorical purposes, this piece is the pieces in this monumental series are prints, not paintings. Coinciding with the production of this Love Forever series, Kusama also begins producing smaller scale prints very much in the same pictorial mode, although pretty much all of them have some sort of color. These recent works seem to bring forth few intriguing possibilities. One, the potential centrality of print as medium to Kusama's concept of love, or more specifically, the concept of love forever. Two, the possibility that with this new Love Forever series, Kusama tried to breach the boundary between her paintings and prints, daring the fans of her quote-unquote serious works to recognize her prints as an integral part of her artistic production. And lastly, a mysterious sense of resistance on the side of the art critics against admitting that any serious artistic production by Kusama can possibly be in print medium. In short, what Kusama has been doing since the late 70s in her prints is much more ambitious, much more profound, and in many respects, much more disturbing than perhaps she is presently given credit for. Kusama is infusing the world, the universe, with her nets and polka dots through the countless duplications and endless circulation of the same visual field, just as Kusama proclaims in the foreword to the catalogue raisonné of her prints. In one interview, Kusama contrasts her works to Impressionism, stating that she, unlike the Impressionists, wanted to create meaningless patterns. It is true that her nets and polka dots defy principle of naturalism and are irrelevant to the science of light and human vision. But at the same time, while it is impossible for our eyes to actually perceive the world like the Impressionists painted it, in certain respects, it is possible to see the world through Kusama's eyes, even if we cannot share in her hallucinations. Our surroundings are infused with repeated patterns. Once initiated into Kusama's world, one cannot help but to notice, for instance, the small pebbles in the pavement, seemingly random patterns created by the fallen leaves, the weaves on a sweater, the eerie backside of the mushroom, the accumulation of the wood chips under a tree, and the bumpiness of the plaster on one's office walls. These are the things that I recognize and, disturbing me for the past 6 months. Then one realizes that the world is Kusama's lemon juice, and we are all simply floating in it. Thank you.
Akiko, thank you very much for that really interesting talk. I love that you ended with that image through the scene of, I guess, a bus advertisement. We have a few moments for questions for Dr. Walley, if anyone has a question for her.
Uh-huh. The horse?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was a little confusing. Was she wearing a hat because it looked like the animal had horns or something?
Yeah, she's actually wearing a hat. I forget the name of it, but a hat that's a little bit pointy that you see in Southeast Asia sometimes. Yeah, just a minute. Let me try to find it. Yeah, and the hat is actually coming off a little bit because she's trying to lean onto the horse. Yeah, this does look like a horn of the horse, huh? Yeah. Yes. But that's what's going on.
Have you seen that film?
Yes, I have. It's actually, the entire thing is available on YouTube. So yeah, when I teach Kusama Yayoi in my course, I actually show part of the clip, and it's trippy, but it's wonderful. Yes?
Print medium inherently has a kind of reproductiveness to
Yes.
it. Yes.
And especially if you're using a grid of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
Has she ever simply taken off on the mechanics of the medium in that way?
Probably. I mean, the fact that she says that she only got interested in print because a professional printer kind of initiated her into it suggests that that's what she's doing. And what she's doing, she's of a later generation. So what she's doing is perfectly in tune with the time period in terms of the history of Japanese print. But it is actually meaningful that she doesn't print her own works, because at the beginning of the modern history of Japanese print, printing, doing everything yourself, was the definition of the artistic print. So, she's of the generation that already moving away from it. Okay. Any other question? Hi.
Beautiful talk, so thank you, Akiko. And I especially liked the movements that you made from the beginning, the way you narrated, because it begins with this idea of these patterns, right? These infinite patterns, this network, being a way of, in a way, theatricalizing her own experience of self-obliteration. And it's very visceral in that sense. So in a way, what is inside is completely externalized and really, really dramatized because of the color, because of the scale. It's magnified as well. So this type of spider web structure or proliferating thoughts, and interestingly enough, most of the time when she does these thoughts, they're never, or they're not never, but they're most of the time biomorphic, right? And they're not always the same size.
That's right. Yeah.
So that is actually the interesting part that gives the sense of infinity, because it's varying, so it has kind of depth. So that moment is the moment of self-obliteration. But then you move toward the end, and I think it's such a wonderful way that you battle, which is a strange paradox. So it's kind of, this is my question. In the end, her patterns actually started to acquire, I mean, in the beginning it was reproductive, it was repetitive, it was about blending into the environment, almost like a kind of mimicking insect, So in the end it actually becomes the reverse, because it becomes her signature. So it becomes her, the way in which she becomes recognized, and now you no longer see these kind of dots without thinking about her. I mean, the only competitor, I think the competitor would be Mary Michael, or something like the last one, when she's in the red, that could, she looks like, I could mistake that for Mary Michael dress, right? So I don't know, how resistant is she, or maybe she's not, to this idea of, now it's no longer self-obliteration. I mean, this is self-reckoned, it's recognizable, that's her signature, right? How to resistant is she about this?
Well, I think she's resistant to certain elements of it. Like she says that she produces pumpkin, prints because everybody loves it. But at the same time, she also says that she absolutely does not want to be recognized as a pumpkin person, right? So pumpkin artist. So that's one level of resistance. But in terms of people recognizing her patterns, I'm not exactly sure how resistant she is, because one of the things that is probably happening is she is extremely competitive and extremely jealous of other people's works. And in 2008 documentary, there's actually a very interesting scene where she's looking through her pieces and checking everything, and then she finds that on the same issue, Murakami Takashi has a piece, and she says, Mr. Murakami's piece is in here too. Mine is much better, right? So what she's doing partly is to sort of use the same technique that Murakami Takashi is using. And for him, it's really, kind of branding, right? And making it recognizable. But for Kusama Yayoi, she's sort of using the same methodology and saying that she can do it better. But at the same time, it kind of serves a different purpose. because, to say that it recognizable as hers, I'm not sure if it's actually exactly true because she is so her work. So it's recognizable as her work. And she is, kind of diffused in her work, and then it becomes recognizable as her. And if we were just talking about, in a general sense, that minute distinction doesn't matter. But if we really see what she's trying to do, she's actually, it's a slight difference to what she's doing from like branding herself. It's not just a marketing tool, but it's something that is a little bit more consistent with the core of her artistic production principle, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yes.
Seems to be of the kind that are very surrounding and engrossing. But I was thinking of the big pumpkin at Naoshima, which sits at the end of a dock, which it's very impressive and large when you're near it. But most often you see it lonely in the distance, so that it's reduced suddenly and becomes a lonely item standing out in the midst of a foreign environment.
Yeah, so you don't quite like it because of that, or?
No, it's just the loneliness, instead of engrossing you, it tends to disappear.
That's actually very interesting. I actually haven't been to the island to actually see it, so I've only seen it in a photograph. But that's actually very interesting. If we really think of the pumpkins as, kind of an avatar of her, right? In a sense, you could almost interpret it as her loneliness, but at the same time, since she's so, concerned about like being part of the nature, part of universe. I mean, to have something that is so, like if you are near it, that it pops out at you, but to make that blending with the surrounding might actually be very meaningful. Yeah, in a kind of a moving way. Yeah.
Just to move off, not so much about her art, but so much has been made about her self-institutionalization and so on, but clearly she's very productive through all those years. And I wonder to what extent we tend to think of that kind of institutionalization as being very structured. To what extent is she really just kind of living there without, how engaged is she in kind of the institutionalization?
Well, I mean, she is very much engaged because I mean she lives in the hospital, but she actually has her studio outside of the hospital, and it's a whole operation. She has staffs working for her. For some of these large pieces, staffs are the one who prep all of her works and turn the canvas so that she can just stay in one spot and paint. And there are staffs who coordinate her, like travels and meeting with other people. And she's getting awards left and right. So in that respect, she is involved in institution in like multiple levels, like from the government level all the way down to like, Oh, well,
To what extent is she actively in therapy? Is she engaged in what happens on the day? Or is she just simply is it just the fact that she just happens to live in a mental hospital?
well, I know that at the beginning. Yeah. Sorry, the different institution. I know that at the beginning she was actually getting therapy, and she, at the beginning she actually had her studio inside the hospital. But nowadays, I'm not sure how much she does it because she doesn't really emphasize that part of her life, and unless she talks about it, it's kind of kept very private. Yeah, and so one of the quandaries that I've seen scholars have is that how aware is she of her both condition but also her self-image, and she is, she appears to be, when we see her in media, extremely in control of her public image, Yeah, but to say that there are extremes people who say that the whole idea of illness is kind of a show, but that clearly is not the case. So how to actually engage with what she says about her illness is very, very difficult in terms of Kusama. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I want to thank Dr. Walley again for her talk, and I know that she had said available if anyone had any other questions that they wanted to come up and ask her. I'd like to thank all of you for coming today, and your comment about the Murakami juxtaposed with the Kusama reminded me that we are anticipating in the coming months to have both a Murakami and Kusama Yayoi Infinity Net painting on view in the same gallery where the prints are on view now. Both are coming into us through our Masterworks on Loan program. We don't have definite dates yet, but that should be interesting to see them juxtaposed, and hopefully she won't find out and get upset at us. So thank you again for coming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend.